business offices, MSU Government Affairs, and MSU Extension. We also hope that you will join us on February 22nd for an IPSR forum on problems in hiring and workforce development, and that you'll nominate your legislative interns for our 3 intern awards through the Rosenthal program. The nomination deadline is March the 4th. And of course, we hope you will join us for the Michigan Political Leadership Program annual dinner this year at the Lansing Center featuring Frank Luntz on April 20th. Now I would like to turn it over, because we have a packed day full of great information, to IPSR Associate Director Arnold Weinfeld.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And again, thanks to everyone for being here today. A couple of things as we get going. First of all, please use the chat to introduce yourselves, and the raise hand function, because of the size of our participants today, is down, but you will be able to put questions in either through the chat or Q&A box. Let's see. David Zinn, I just promoted you to panelist, so hopefully that's coming through. And I think that's about it. So let's get started right away, because as Matt noted, we do have a packed house. And Jim and or David, I'll let either one of you take it away.
Okay, let me try and get the screen up here.
Thank you. David Zinn, of course, folks, is with the Senate Fiscal Agency, and Jim Stansel with the House Fiscal Agency. And they're going to take the first half hour of our program to talk about economic and revenue forecasts.
So Jim and I will present basically the results of the January 14th Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. The conference is required by statute to take place at least twice a year, once in January and once in May. Essentially, the January kind of forecast essentially reevaluates the size of what we think revenues are going to be for current and future years, particularly the upcoming budget year, kind of fixes the size of the pie. The governor's budget is required to be built on that forecast. And as that goes through the budget process that's just now beginning, when it gets down towards the end in May, we take another look at revenues just to see if things are still going well. The participants are members of, it's Treasury, House Fiscal Agency, and Senate Fiscal Agency, and it's supposed to be an ability to essentially kind of remove the politics from how big the pie is, so that the legislature can basically discuss and resolve how to spend that money, rather than having them try to also argue about how much money will be available. So with that, I will see if I can get there we go. I'll start off with the economic forecast that is required by statute to be made. We do have to forecast both the US and Michigan economies. I won't spend a lot of time on this, because most of you are probably more interested in budget stuff, particularly the presentation that will follow Jim and I. So the most general measure of the US economy is gross domestic product. When it's adjusted for inflation, we refer to it as real GDP. This shows the level and growth rates for each year for basically a 20-year period. You can see the 2008-9 recession resulted in about a 2.6% drop. You can see that we've had stable but fairly mediocre growth since 2009 in the economy, and then you can see the 2020 COVID-induced recession. Now, one of the things that probably the most overused term since COVID has occurred, particularly among economists, has been unprecedented. We found changes of unprecedented magnitudes. Relationships have unprecedentedly broken down and not held the way they normally have, and it's made forecasting a little bit different. And we'll talk about more of that a little bit later. But I did want to highlight that the 3.4% decline basically is a lot worse than what we had in 2008-9, which was considered the worst recession that we'd had since the Great Depression. The 31.2% decline in GDP in the second quarter of 2020 ended up being the largest quarterly decline since at least World War II, and it was 3 times as large as the second largest decline, which ironically occurred in the first quarter of 1958 during the 57-58 flu pandemic. You can see from this forecast, we expected that by the end of 2021, GDP would have recovered past its pre-COVID levels with pretty strong growth on a historical basis, 5.5% growth. We expect growth to continue to be strong in 2022 with 4.1%. And as things kind of return more to normal, we'll see that growth will slow back down to probably around 2.2% in 2024, largely because growth rates are very much constrained by the growth in labor force, which is tied to population growth, and productivity growth. And you add those two numbers together and you get the types of numbers that we saw a lot of in the mid to late 2000 teens. Since inflation's been gathering a lot of headlines and we're required to forecast inflation, this shows you inflation rates since 1970 in the US Consumer Price Index. There are a number of different measures of inflation. This one's the one probably that's best known. We found that COVID has created a lot of multiple paths towards upward price pressures. We have individuals that have left the labor force, and a fair number of them are permanently gone, particularly older adults that have left over the last 2 years. There was a shift in consumer demand from services to goods that put pressure both on manufacturers and service industries. And even for those who haven't left the labor force, illness has complicated availability, it's complicated transportation networks. These have not been problems that have been isolated to the United States. And as you can see in 2021, it resulted in the highest inflation rate that we've seen in a fair amount of time. However, you can see from the graph that while inflation rates have been higher in recent quarters than over the last decade, the numbers are high, but they're not excessive even by post-1970s standards. I mean, obviously, we're not looking at anything like we were experiencing in the 70s. But as production expands, we bring more facilities on, like the Intel facility, building more chips, and other manufacturers expand production capabilities. As consumption shifts a little bit more back towards services and people view COVID as more of endemic rather than pandemic, and stimulus balances get exhausted, these will all help reduce price pressures. We expect inflation to kind of be about the same in 2022 as it was in 2021 before dropping down to target levels in 23 and 24. As chip shortages and other supply constraints allow production to increase, we expect vehicle sales to rise. That's been one of the big constraints on them in over the last year. However, we expect the Detroit 3 share to continue falling, although 2022 will have a slight rebound from 2021 levels. Given Michigan's heavy reliance on vehicle manufacturing, both rising sales and declining market share have some pretty significant implications for the economy. In terms of the Michigan economy, we forecast that during the last year, we added 120,000 jobs. You can see that's a pretty big number by historical standards for Michigan. And we think this year we'll add 133,000. We think then as the economy kind of returns to normal, job growth will return to more sustainable levels. With the Michigan economy only adding 40,000 payroll jobs in 2024. In terms of how that compares historically, this shows that by 2024, despite that strong growth, we will not have recovered to the pre-COVID employment level by the end of the forecast. and we'll still be about 300,000 jobs below where we were at the peak in 2000. In terms of revenue, we had a lot of revisions in the revenue forecast for FY21, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of those because some of them relate to matters that don't go forward, which affects the revenue numbers that we'll be presenting later. So this shows the various forecasts that we've made at the consensus conferences since our first forecast for FY21 in January of 2020. And you can see that we thought the state would get about $25.5 billion between general fund and school aid combined. After COVID struck, that decline in GDP and the impact on economic activity suggested that FY21 and particularly FY20 revenues were going to take substantial hits. So we lowered that forecast. By August, we realized FY20 was not going to be so bad, but we figured that growth would still be somewhat constrained. At that point, there were no forecasts of additional stimulus packages. We were looking at, in fact, the unemployment supplements running out. And when we forecast, we tend to forecast based on existing policy. By the time we got to January and May of 21, there had been additional federal stimulus packages that added more money to the economy, and we raised our forecasts. And it turns out that the economy responded quite a bit better than we thought and wound up with preliminary FY21 revenue actually totaling $29 billion between general fund and school aid fund combined. Where some of that extra money came from, one was individual income tax annual payments. And this essentially reflects what people end up paying after, they've had their withholding taken out. And you can see that we received almost $1.8 billion last year. The nearly $900 million that we received in May of 21, because we delayed the filing date until May, actually exceeded some prior years' entire totals. So in 1 month, we got more than we did in some entire previous fiscal years. And a lot of that reflects strong capital gains that happened in the market during 2020, and as well as a lot of income growth, particularly for some upper income filers. In terms of quarterly payments, this is made based on your higher liabilities and things that aren't subject to withholding, like capital gains. And you can see that FY21 was a record year for us, even surpassing FY18, where that bump occurred because there were a bunch of changes done as a result of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the federal level. In both cases, these were, if we could all forecast the stock market, none of us would probably be doing the jobs we're doing now. And the market was big, and it had a big impact on revenues. In terms of sales and use tax payments, people with services kind of shutting down devoted money to goods production, goods consumption. Stimulus payments helped fuel that as well. And so you can see pretty unprecedented growth in spending and subject to sales tax. And of course, the shift from services to goods has driven a lot of it because most services in Michigan are untaxed, while most sales of goods are taxed. And you can see that we basically had almost a 20% increase in sales and use tax revenue between FY20 and FY21. And as you might guess, if businesses are selling goods, their profits are going to be doing well. And we had pretty unprecedented payments under the corporate income tax and Michigan business tax, generating nearly $1.9 billion in FY21. And, if you'd looked at what happened in terms, like I said, of the economy in terms of the GDP decline, these were not the types of numbers you would have expected, particularly back in 2020. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim to talk about our forecast for taxes.
Thanks, David. If you want to jump ahead, I'm going to talk about 4 of the major taxes. that comprise, well, probably about 85% of GFGP and combined school aid fund revenue. The first one David's talked about already is the net income tax that the state brings in. And again, starting from an unprecedented, I'll get the word out of the way very quickly, level in fiscal year 21, we're actually looking at a slight decline for 20, or a very slight increase for 22. And that's a combination really of kind of the lack of the income tax supports that we saw, or income supports we saw earlier in the pandemic. And then also there's a tax shift that occurs between 21 and 22 that shifts money out of 22 into 21, but it's a one-time issue. So that's why you don't see much growth in 22. After that, we start returning to more normal growth in net income tax revenue, about 3.8% in 23 and slowing a little bit to 2.9% in 24, but that still gets us up to about $12.7 billion. For net sales and use, again, the 2021 numbers were off the charts as consumers were still purchasing taxable goods as opposed to untaxed services throughout the pandemic. We do actually anticipate a slight decline in 22 of about 0.7%. And that's also partially due to the fact that personal income growth is supposed to be, we're projecting as less than 0.5% in 2022. So without as much income growth, you wouldn't expect there to be as much increase in spending. It does pick up a little bit in 23 and 24 as it grows by 1.1 and 1.8%. Fairly slow growth rates for combined sales and use, but again, it gets us well over $12 billion by the time you get to 2024. Looking at combined MBT and CIT estimates, David's talked about the CIT and how corporate profits affect that and how much we saw in 21. We actually saw an 81% increase in combined MBT and CIT payments. Just to remind you, there are some firms that still pay the Michigan business tax, but they're the ones that have certificated credits, and that actually drains about 500 million out of combined MBT and CIT revenue each year. So going forward, we're looking at then a big decline of about 28% in 22, smaller decline in 23, and it jumps up about 10% in 24. But the CIT is a highly volatile tax. It's a smaller, even modest changes on a smaller base cause things to jump around substantially. And then the last one I want to talk about just very quickly is the state education tax, of which 100% goes to the school aid fund. It's a flat 6 mil rate on taxable values. So any growth here you see is representing growth in taxable value. It's not a rate change or anything like that. And in years past, if you looked at this chart, you would have seen flat bars all the way across. We weren't seeing much taxable value growth. But now, because of kind of a strong housing market and we're seeing expansion coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing increases in the state education tax in excess of 4% in 22, and then slowing somewhat to about 3.4% by the time you get to 24, but still well over $2.5 billion. And those are, very strong numbers, higher than we've ever seen before. When you put all the pieces together and look at and distribute the taxes properly into GFGP and the school aid components, the first slide we look at is kind of what are we seeing as a baseline growth, and this is growth because of economic conditions, not because of tax changes. And long run, and you can kind of see this if you look at 2016, the blue line is showing you what the long run growth rate is, and we've been at about 3.3% overall. Obviously 18.8% in 21 is unsustainable, and we're looking at far lower growth rates, even negative in 22, and then not even getting up to the long-term average in 23 and 24. So things are clearly slowing in terms of baseline growth. If you look at combining all the taxes and looking at just net GFGP, It grew about 20% in 21. Again, for all the reasons David mentioned, it's expected to drop by about 3.9% to just under 2.5 billion in 22, increase to about 2.9 billion in 23, and 13.3 billion in 24. And both of those increases the last 2 years are well over 3%. And just very quickly, obviously the 13.3 billion in 24 would be the largest we've ever seen for general fund revenue. Kind of a similar story for school aid, although not quite as dramatic. We're seeing slower growth, but still growth. It's the school aid fund is highly dominated by sales and use and set revenue. And as we saw before, sales and use revenue really isn't increasing dramatically in the out years in 23 and 24. And while set is growing substantially, remember it's only about 2.5 billion out of a $16.5 billion base by the time you get to 24. So even though there's strong set growth, it's not big enough to really influence overall school aid fund growth. So school aid fund is growing by about 1% in 23 and just shy of 2% in 24. Very quickly, if we look at where we were in May for our revenue estimates, and then the adjustments we would make now that we know pretty much what we think we know what 21 final revenue will be, we're up by about 1.7 billion in general fund and a little over 1 billion in school aid. So combined, we're up about $2.7 billion from where we thought we were going to be in May. So that, again, that's just the impact of kind of the dynamic economy we've seen over the last several months. There are a couple other things that we need to do as part of the revenue conference. One of them is estimate the income tax trigger, which based on general fund growth, if it's substantial enough relative to fiscal year 21, it would trigger automatic reductions in the income tax. Well, given how strong a fiscal year 21 general fund growth came in, it's unlikely, given our inflation and revenue estimates, that the trigger would kick in at any time in the near future. So that's not a concern right now. Another thing we are required to do is determine whether or not they're pay-ins or payouts to the budget stabilization or the rainy day fund. The calculations would suggest a pay-in of about 51.8 million for 22, but it does require an appropriation. And the governor has, in her budget proposal, put in a $52 million pay-in, which would bring the BSF up to about 1.46 billion. And we would then also be looking at a pay-in of about 150 million in 24, no payouts. But again, these have to be appropriated. They're not automatic. And then finally, the other thing we need to do is estimate the constitutional revenue limit. This is one of the many Headley limitations. And basically it means the state can't bring in any more than 9.9% of personal income as revenue from all state sources. And as you can look at the chart, we've been substantially below that for the last several years. 21 becomes a little less substantially below because of the large revenue gains we saw, but in general, we're expecting to be between 12 and 14 billion dollars below that revenue limit through 24. And last but not least, just a couple comments about the uncertainties with any forecast has risks. And they're just listed for you here, but the transition from fiscal policy to normal fiscal policy, is Build Back Better debt on arrival? Will there be climate change spending? Those are all things we don't know about. We don't know how the pandemic is going to pan out and when it becomes an endemic instead. David talked about labor force participation, and that's important. For Michigan, we saw the large increases in consumer spending and how it affected sales and use tax revenue. We expect there to be a shift back from goods to services, but we don't know exactly when that will occur. And also there is a lot of pent-up demand still in the economy, and we're not sure how, exactly how that will play out, especially now that stimulus funds have kind of been pulled away. So with that, I guess that leaves us about a minute and a half for questions.
Well, I want to thank Jim and David for that great, concise presentation. I think that's the fastest I've seen the two of you go, but it's greatly appreciated. It gives folks a baseline of information. We don't have any questions in as of yet, so I'm hoping you two can stick around, but I've got a couple of things to clarify, ask you to clarify. Your presentation was simply on general fund dollars, not any American Rescue Plan Act dollars. Is that correct?
That's correct. When we do consensus estimates, we look at what current law is. You know, we don't anticipate that something will happen down the road. And right now, those dollars are sitting there, but they have not yet been appropriated. And so since we don't know how they're going to go out the door, we can't incorporate those into our estimates.
And can you give folks, I mean, $1.46 billion in the Budget Stabilization Fund, sometimes known as the BSF or the Rainy Day Fund, sounds like a lot of money, but how long would that actually fund state government for?
Well,
I'll let you have this one, David, although I've got my comments as well.
if you look at it as a percentage of general fund and school aid fund ongoing revenue, it ends up being about 5%. So it is not a particularly large margin. We had something akin to that in the BSF back in 2000 when we had much smaller general fund and school aid fund appropriations, and we basically lost it all in a year.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment.
It sounds like a lot of money, but it doesn't take much of a recession to cost you $1.5 billion. And part of that is just simply because of how much money we get from taxes like the individual income tax and sales and use tax revenue. You know, small percentage changes in growth rate end up being a lot of money.
Well, thank you both very much. Hopefully you'll stick around for the rest of the session. But I'm very pleased to have our next presenter, Andy Solon from the State Budget Office, give an overview of the governor's proposed FY23 budget. As you know, it's been a very busy week given the release of the budget. So really appreciate Andy being here today. Andy, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Arnold, and thank you to Jim and David, two just absolute rock stars around here. So I think I'm going to run through some slides rather quickly, recognizing that I don't think we can really cover $74 billion in the next 30 minutes. So I'll try to hit some highlights and then leave opportunities for questions. So what we've got here are some slides from the State Budget Director's presentation provided to the legislature earlier this week, detailing the governor's proposed FY23 budget. As I mentioned, the total budget that we're recommending for 23 is approximately $74.1 billion. The general fund has increased to $14.3 billion, and school aid appropriations are 16.6. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think David and Jim did a fantastic job going through the revenue changes over the last few years. And I think I would just note that we had this slide in the presentation to the legislature earlier this week to essentially condense what David and Jim were describing. The fluctuations in revenue over the last few years have created a level of uncertainty, but it's also provided some significant one-time increases in revenues. And so we are facing a significant one-time balance of general fund and school aid appropriations, or revenues, I should say, in part because of these rollovers from the last few years. So I think that's an important consideration as we look at the governor's the governor's proposed budget, because we are seeking to make strategic ongoing investments in these key priority areas, but we're also attempting to make some very fiscally responsible one-time investments, recognizing that these balances are likely not to remain in the future. So just from a high level, the governor's budget really includes five theme areas. The first is investing in our students. The second is focused on continuing to improve our infrastructure. The third is workforce and economic development investments. The fourth would be additional support for our public health infrastructure. And then the fifth is continuing to promote safe community investments. As Jim and David also mentioned, the budget does recommend 51.8 million in a BSF deposit. So let me just dive in here to the education portion. You'll see in the governor's recommendation a significant investment in these three areas. The first would be a continued focus on a weighted per pupil funding formula. So in addition to making baseline per pupil investments, the governor recognizes that students have faced different challenges. They're not all the same. And so there's a focus on education categoricals to support different types of students and their enrollment in schools. The second area is talent. So I think we all recognize that there is a challenge in making sure that we have the pipeline of educators that will be moving into our schools, but also is seeking to ensure that we retain educators that are currently in the classroom for as long as we can. So you'll see significant investments in that area. And then also mental health and school safety are certainly top of mind these days. And so you'll see some significant focus in that area as well. In looking at the per pupil foundation in the weighted formulas, you'll see there's approximately $988 million that will be dedicated to these baseline weighted investments. So it'll increase the base per pupil funding per district to 9135. That's a 5% increase. And that's 580 million out of that 988. And then the remaining of that 988 would be allocated to these categoricals that I referenced. So you'll see these baseline increases for these categoricals that would be allocated out on a per pupil basis. You've got your economically disadvantaged students, in increased support for special education costs at the local level, some additional CTE investments, rural and isolated districts. As I mentioned with the talent piece, this is a significant focus of one-time school aid investments in the governor's budget. It includes $1.5 billion in retention bonuses for teachers and support staff spread out over 4 years in the recommended budget. In addition, there is a greater focus in teacher onboarding and mentoring. We recognize that it is a challenge for new teachers to enter into the classroom and transition from their higher education experience into the classroom. What we're hoping to do is ensure that those new teachers have a much more robust mentoring and induction process to help ensure that they don't move out of the classroom or decide to change careers. So you'll see additional payments to schools to encourage senior teachers to work with new teachers as they're entering the classroom. You'll also see in this area and some other areas of the budget a recognition that there are regional challenges across the state that are different. You know, some of the staffing issues in Metro Detroit may be different than the UP, and so what we're seeking to do is provide some additional grant funding for regional initiatives that seek to address some of the localized challenges that a community or a region may have in building their workforce. And as I mentioned before, the third leg of this is a greater investment in mental health and behavioral health supports in our classrooms. So you will see significant investments to provide proven research-based models to all school districts. You will see a greater focus in getting more behavioral health professionals in the classroom, setting up both mental and physical health centers in the classroom. And you will see a greater focus on universal mental health screenings. In addition, the governor has recommended $65 million here for school safety investments. The $50 million in school safety grants would be an expanded version of previous school safety grants that have been allocated in the past. The governor's budget includes some expanded uses for the grants to ensure that they can be effective in meeting the needs of individual districts. And the $15 million is allocated to develop those models or build on proven research models in partnering with public safety and higher education research institutions to make sure that you know, the best models and training and research would be available to all districts throughout the state. And then just a few other notes here on additional one-time investments in the school aid budget. You will see a $1 billion deposit into a proposed infrastructure modernization fund in this budget. And this is a recognition that schools throughout the state have funding challenges to, in some respect, how they fund their capital costs locally can be a challenge for districts that may have low property tax values and may be near their existing property tax caps now. So this fund is intended to help support the capital needs of school districts that perhaps they've been unable to address locally. In addition, you'll see $94 million for literacy investments in the city of Detroit, and an additional $50 million for before and after school-based programs. And this is really an additional investment from last year, recognizing the impacts of COVID and trying to help provide additional opportunities for students to help get caught up from potential pandemic learning losses. On the higher education front, the governor's budget includes some significant investments into the operations funding for universities and community colleges. For both of those budgets, there's a 5% ongoing increase for universities and higher education, and then an additional 5% in one-time payments allocated through the existing formulas for those two budgets. In the higher education space, you will also see the establishment of a new per student funding floor. This is a recognition that there is some significant disparities across our higher ed budget in terms of our baseline investment in each university. And so this is this is an attempt to start to establish some minimum funding levels on a per student basis to get some of the lower funded institutions caught up. And then in addition, you'll see this item fund for both higher education and community colleges. And this is similar to the $1 billion investment for the K-12 institutions. This would be a new one-time fund of $200 million total to assist universities and community colleges with capital infrastructure needs. I will just note quickly here that in the infrastructure space, there are significant new investments. Much of that is related to the federal IJA dollars that are coming into the state. You will see $578 million from the federal infrastructure law that will start to come in for the FY23 budget. The supplemental associated with this budget recommendation for the 22 current year will also include additional allocations to Michigan through the federal IJA law. And then in addition, the governor's budget includes additional state dollars for critical road projects. And not noted here, but if you look into some of the other transportation and infrastructure investments, you'll see the governor's budget includes funding for other infrastructure such as pump generators on state trunk lines and highways. This is in response to some of the flooding issues that we've seen, particularly in Metro Detroit over the past year, and the need to upgrade that infrastructure to ensure that our pumping stations on the highways can handle an increased inflow of floodwaters. In this next section, this is a recognition that the governor is seeking strategic investments in frontline workers. So of the significant proposals here to focus on workers, you will see $500 million in a recommended hero pay bonus. This $500 million is the one portion of the governor's budget that seeks to use federal ARP dollars. As Arnold alluded to before, there are significant American Rescue Plan dollars allocated to the state that have not been appropriated yet. The overwhelming majority of those funds are not included in this recommendation, in part because the governor has presented proposals for those funds last fall to the legislature, and we're seeking to continue those discussions along with the development of the FY23 budget. Some additional workforce investments proposed in the governor's budget, all would be considered one-time proposals at this time, would be additional focus to get young professionals into the workforce, making sure that we help remove some barriers for existing working age populations that may have challenges that they face to get them upskilled into the workforce. In addition, you'll see $11 million here for an investment in our state and local land bank. I think the idea here is to look at the properties held by land banks and see if we can partner with building trades and the construction industry to try to redevelop those properties that could be more quickly put into the market to help with our housing stock. Some additional economic development highlights from the governor's proposed budget includes $500 million in a one-time investment into the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund. You may recall that this fund was part of the December economic development package that passed the legislature to provide the resources for transformational economic development projects. At that time, there was a $1 billion deposit into the SOAR fund, of which has been used to help support the General Motors announcement that recently came out last month. So this $500 million would be deposited into that fund for additional future transformational economic development projects. The governor's budget also includes some significant investments in new economy sectors. There clearly is a focus in the EV space and our future mobility investments to help transition our existing automotive base into the future with EVs. So you will see transformational education infrastructure projects that seek to build upon existing partnerships with higher education research institutions in the private sector to help build out that R&D for our future mobility. You'll also see the desire to create a state mobility future office. This was something that was proposed in the 22 budget that was not included, and so the governor has reinserted that with a recognition that the state needs a more coordinated effort across all of our agencies with a focus on our mobility future. In addition, you have probably seen that the governor had proposed in her State of the State a rebate for electric vehicle purchases. So that's a $50 million one-time investment for up to $2,500 in rebates for EV vehicle purchases. On the environment side, I think you'll see additional federal IJA investments associated with the infrastructure law. The focus from there will be additional funding to Michigan for lead service line replacements, water infrastructure facilities, stormwater infrastructure. So that would be in addition to state proposals that are in the governor's budget to increase investments in those areas. And one example would be $48 million in state GF funding for grants to support local governments with the technical assistance and the planning needs for lead service line replacements. There's $40 million in home plumbing grants for residents. There's an additional allocation for high water infrastructure grants. This is something that has been included in the last few budgets to help provide resources to local governments as they deal with increased impacts of climate change. Just moving over into the health space, there are a number of investments in this area, but I will just highlight quickly the focus on dental services. The governor's budget includes $240 million to overhaul the state's Medicaid dental services, and this is an attempt to really expand access to dental coverage for adult Medicaid enrollees. And this would build off of the success of the Healthy Michigan or the Healthy Kids Dental program in the state. Some additional behavioral health investments in the governor's budget. This is a clear recognition that the state has some longstanding needs in the behavioral health space, and there's a two-track focus here to make some immediate investments to build up our capacity by expanding our inpatient beds throughout the state. And you know, in this space, there are significant challenges right now when there's a shortage of beds. You know, many of the individuals that might be placed in these inpatient facilities are or remain in our traditional hospital spaces, and certainly that's a challenge in this environment with COVID when there is a shortage of beds. So the governor's budget would provide immediate resources to expand capacity now, while also looking to the future and setting aside $325 million to develop a plan for a new state psychiatric complex to meet those long-term capacity needs for the state. In addition, when it comes to capacity, I think there's also additional investments here for student loans for folks that may be interested in moving into the behavioral health space. So this includes $25 million to support student loan reimbursements. Not mentioned here on this slide, but when it comes to the frontline workers, there are also additional one-time investments to support direct care workers in the behavioral health space, recognizing the shortage and the need there as well. Just real quick here on strong and safe communities. The governor's budget includes a 5% ongoing increase to the statutory portion of our CBT revenue sharing, and an additional 5% one-time payment. And a new item included this year is a $50 million allocation for hold harmless. And this is to recognize that with the 2020 census changes, there could be communities that would have to remit payments based on population changes. And so in order to hold all communities harmless from that, this $50 million would be there to offset any of those clawbacks. On the community development side, the governor's budget includes additional one-time grants for regional projects and initiatives that would either support economic development initiatives or infrastructure initiatives that local governments and regional partners would come together and make proposals to the state on a competitive grant basis. There's also $75 million for cultural institutions, and there's a new $40 million proposed one-time investment to support communities that have large employers that have either left or disinvested to some extent in the communities that they're in. And this is a recognition that you know, the state can come in and perhaps help support in that transition and provide some opportunities and planning for those communities to provide a future that includes additional workforce opportunities beyond the employer changes. And I'll stop there. I know we're up against time, and happy to take any questions here or offline if folks would like to chat more about the budget.
Andy, I greatly appreciate you being here and putting together that presentation for this group just a couple of days after release of the budget. If you could stop sharing your screen at this point, that would be great. And as Andy noted, he and both, of course, Jim Stansel and David Zinn are available to you as staff for your questions along the way during the budget process, which will be ongoing, of course, over the next few months as the legislature works to get that done, no doubt by June 30th or the July 4th holiday. Andy, we did have a question pop up in the Q&A about high-speed trains. Was there anything in the budget for high-speed trains, or I'll say for public transit generally?
The governor's budget does include some additional federal IJA dollars for rail and transit programs. I think it's in the neighborhood of $100 million, but I would certainly encourage folks to go to the MI budget website and take a look at the issue papers for federal IJA. You should see some additional detail there on the rail and transit infrastructure investments.
And you keep mentioning IJA. IJA, of course, is the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed early this year, late last year. Are those funds, you made it a point to say that ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, are not within your presentation, or not included in the governor's budget proposal, if I understood that correct. But have those infrastructure dollars been plugged in?
Well, they're plugged into the recommendation here we have, and I think that's a great point in that the federal IJA law, as it relates to the transportation funding, is essentially a reauthorization of the previous Federal Transportation Act. And so the good part there is those dollars are essentially pushed out through the formula, and we're, I think, hopeful that that'll make for a much smoother way to get the dollars out to locals and to MDOT without necessarily having to build out a new formula.
Okay. I don't see any other questions right now. Anything else you, David, or Jim would like to add before we close this session?
I would encourage folks to check out the budget, MI budget, and let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, again, I do want to emphasize that these folks are available to you as staff to help you gain an understanding for the people you work for as the budget moves through the process. They're not just there for the Appropriations Committee members, but they're there for the entire legislature. And their presentations are already posted, and a video recording of their presentations will also be made available after we're done today. As I said, I really appreciate you, Andy, David, and Jim for being with us. And we'll move on now to our next session. I know this has been a bit to take in for everyone, but we're going to move into our next session before we take a break. And Andy mentioned it in his presentation, the SOAR program, which is the new economic development incentive program that has been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And with us today to help us understand what that's all about and why it's necessary and what the goals are is Josh Hunt, an executive vice president with the MEDC. Josh, thanks for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate the time with all of you today. I'm share my screen so that I can walk through a few slides. And then I also want to make sure that we keep plenty of time for open dialogue. I saw just the end of the previous presenter, and I saw some really good questions. I want to make sure that much of this time that we have today is around that. So I'm going to share this screen right now. Let me know if for some reason you are having any trouble seeing it. But I'll start off here with a quick overview of the MEDC and what we are working on overall. While I want to get into the SOAR fund and the critical industry program and strategic site readiness program, I want to step back just for a second to talk about the MEDC and what we do. In my role, I'm the executive vice president and chief business development officer, overseeing all of our business development functions for the organization, working to make sure that we're attracting, growing, and seeing business startups happen in the state, and also working to make sure that we have the talented workforce to fill positions in those spaces. But more broadly, the MEDC is working towards making sure that we can build the most equitable, fastest growing, and most resilient economy in the country. And doing that by making sure that we're finding ways for economic development, economic opportunity to occur for Michiganders in all 83 counties of the state, that we're not seeing a choppy type of economy where there's growth in some parts of the state, but struggles in others. We know that for Michigan to successfully come out of the pandemic and successfully grow, we need to make sure that we're seeing it happen in all corners of the state, from Menominee to Monroe. And that's a focus of ours. And we look to do that by providing great job opportunities for pathway jobs that lead to full involvement in the economy. We do that by making sure we're partnering with our regional economic development organizations. And we do that by making sure, first and foremost, that we're serving our customers. While I'm going to talk about the incentive tools and the importance of the SOAR legislation that was passed, first and foremost, we need to make sure that we are supporting our businesses and our customers in the state through strong customer service. That is what is going to get Michigan on the map. That's what keeps the MEDC involved. And that's how we are going to successfully move forward as a state here. And so putting Michigan in a position of strength and certainty does start with that strong customer service. And it starts with, and it continues with the way that we talk about Michigan growing as a state around why companies should choose Michigan. And we don't start with incentives. We start with the overall landscape of the benefits of doing business here in Michigan, based on our access to supply chains being close to within 500 miles of 50% of the North American and of the American and Canadian population centers. We talk about the great talent that we have here in Michigan with a top 10 manufacturing and STEM workforce, as well as the highest concentration of engineers, as being one of the few states where we have the talent base where a company could put a headquarters, an R&D and engineering center, as well as manufacturing, and be successful in getting the talent in all three of those spaces. And we also talk about the overall business climate of doing business in Michigan. We're consistently ranked as a top state in terms of the combined cost of living and cost of doing business, where dollars go further in Michigan than they do in many of our competing states. And we have a tax climate that is understandable and beneficial. And that lays the groundwork for the work that we're doing to try to see businesses choose to grow and stay in Michigan and move to Michigan going forward. That is where we're always going to start, because we need to provide the best quality environment for investment and job growth to occur, and not try to simply win on incentives or cost savings alone, because some other country or some other state is always going to have a cheaper business climate. What we want to have, or more incentives, what we want to have is that overall basis that when you're looking at Michigan, you're looking at a quality place to get what you need to be successful, while also having a great quality of life beyond just the quality of the business climate. And so we have these new tools, under the SOAR fund, and the slide here is showing the Strategic Site Readiness Program, but I'll step back a little bit to talk about how it came together first and foremost. The SOAR fund is a fund that was put in place to allow Michigan to be able to provide incentive tools under the Strategic Site Readiness Program, as well as the Critical Industry Program. The legislature appropriated $1 billion into this fund in December. The governor's recommendation that came out earlier this week recommended an additional $500 million into this fund, and it's designed as a tool to allow us to compete for transformational opportunities in the state. It was a multi-step process to get to the point of the funding. First and foremost, I have to say the relationship and the partnership between the legislature, the executive office, the MEDC, the local economic development partners, the business community, all coming together and recognizing the need for this type of tool was incredible. It was an honor to be a part of it. And I have just amazing things to say about all the different participants in the way that Team Michigan came together to recognize something that we needed to allow us to compete for projects that we need to win as a state. And so this is set up as both a policy framework by creating the strategic site readiness program and the critical industry program, but also a funding framework that funds those programs. And so the tools allow us to have the proper policy tools that we need in order to compete. And then the appropriation puts the funding into those for us to be able to utilize the dollars in continuous partnership with the legislature through legislative transfers that will be necessary in order for us to support any project. And as we move into the individual components of the programs, the first one that I will start with is the strategic site readiness program. Michigan has been behind for many years in terms of a site readiness program compared to our competing states. We recognize that especially the southern states are investing in mega sites, are investing in sites of all types to make sure that they have development ready sites for projects that come to their states. I would give an example. In 2017, Michigan was competing for the Toyota Mazda plant that ultimately went to Alabama. While there were many factors, the primary factor of why Michigan lost this project was a lack of a ready site for them to develop. In Alabama, they had a site that state and the local community had been working on for about a decade to get ready for that type of investment. And the local economic development official in Alabama talked about that and saying they didn't win the Toyota Mazda plant in 2017 when the announcement occurred. They won that plant when they began investing in that site in 2010 and put in the years of work that it takes to have a site truly development ready. With this program, we're looking at balancing that long-term type of development that's needed, while also being able to have that on-demand support that's necessary for projects that are coming into the pipeline and need site readiness efforts to support their project as they're looking at a development opportunity. This program is designed to do both of those things. In the proactive sense, we want to make sure that we have multiple development ready mega sites that are designed to defined as sites above 400 acres in the statute, but that we also have development ready sites that are of smaller size that allow us to build out the supply chain ecosystem of the types of industries we're looking to grow here in this state, as well as allow us to have sites in areas where maybe it doesn't make sense to have this type of a large tract of land developed. If it's in an urban core and there's not major land availability, let's develop a 30 to 50 acre site that allows us to have a great project into that area. Or if it's in a more rural community that maybe doesn't have the talent base for a 5,000 job manufacturing plant that would need a mega site, we want to make sure we're developing land that's available for projects that meet the talent base and meet the needs and desires of that community. And that's why the first consideration that we're looking at with this program is regional priority, regional emphasis, and regional need. This is a statewide program and an MSF funded program, but it's something that we are going to work closely and are required to work closely every step of the way with the local communities. It's a locally driven process to make sure we're identifying the land, to make sure that we're properly marketing the land, and that we're developing the land to be ready for these types of industrial uses based on the priorities and needs of that community. We're also looking at it from the standpoint of how can we make sure that we are investing in sites that have potential to ultimately bring successful projects to the state. And so we will utilize this funding for things like engineering on the site, for initial remediation if necessary. We'll use it for various studies that take place to make sure we have a good, strong understanding of the site. And then ultimately it can be used for, after that is completed, things like infrastructure support, options or purchase of land, as well as other build out things that are necessary to have the site be truly development ready. All of these will be required to have several different considerations, building off of that regional impact and building off of the need for the funds to look at things like the overall benefit that the state is receiving by this investment, the potential job creation, the type of potential job creation, other factors that would come from this type of development, both for a long-term proactive development as well as for supporting a project that is needed, as a part of their development that comes along. The other component of this SOAR legislation is the critical industry program. That is a program that allows us to be responsive to major transformational opportunities that Michigan can compete for, both that we're competing for in the pipeline today, but also critically to help us be able to have a tool for the long term to see more projects come into our pipeline. This will be used for those transformational type of projects that are creating a significant amount of jobs, bringing significant investment, and are bringing either new technologies to the state or are future looking in terms of areas of strength that we already have, but are looking towards the future economy. And I think the General Motors project, that was the first project we supported under this, signifies the types of projects that we hope to see utilize this program, a project that was looking in the electrification of the automobile space, that was bringing new electric vehicle manufacturing to the state, as well as advanced battery manufacturing. That's a good example of a type of project that's bringing 4,000 to 5,000 jobs and $7 billion of investment, where our current toolkit prior to these tools just simply didn't have the wherewithal to be able to compete with other states for this type of project. And this allows us to have a tool where we can help close deals, secure opportunities, tailor an incentive package for that project, and bring these types of projects that are in the electric vehicle space, the semiconductor space, broader advanced manufacturing space, as well as potentially some research and development and engineering facilities to Michigan in a way that we couldn't compete before. This is intended to be a deal closing fund that we will use on a deal by deal basis, and we expect to use in a very limited way, but that we want to make sure that we have that lets us build out for the long term and be ready to compete with southern states and other states and countries that are looking to take investment into those areas, and a way for us to be able to compete, building off of all the other business climate aspects that we have here in Michigan. I want to talk just a little bit about the process that agreements will go through with this program. Any incentive that we give under this program goes through a public and transparent process that includes multiple steps. First, they have to apply for the incentive and need to go to the Michigan Strategic Fund Board, which is a public body and a public meeting that has transparency and accountability that requires the approval of that board for this use of taxpayer funds. Additionally, after that step, the MEDC and the State Budget Office must make a request for a legislative transfer from the SOAR fund into one or both of these programs that would be utilized to fund an individual project. That helps ensure that there's an additional layer of accountability and transparency in every deal that is done under this program. And so that there continues to be that legislative engagement and broader partnership, not just at the upfront appropriations, but on a transfer by transfer basis. Beyond that transparency and accountability, all of these incentives will also be performance-based with milestones and provisions built into them to ensure accountability throughout the process. There will also be clawbacks every step of the way in case projects are not able to meet those milestones or have other reasons of underperformance. We want to make sure that we are utilizing these tools in a way that help Michigan's economy and bring successful projects here to the state, but also we're protecting the taxpayer dollars to make sure that they're only being used in the way that they were designed to be used and only being used for projects as they perform. While a project is approved for funding at the Michigan Strategic Fund Board, contingent upon the legislative transfer, companies must meet these milestones and show progress before they receive any funds or dollars under this program at all. And these programs are a part of an overall package that allows Michigan to compete for projects and compete for the types of industries and the types of projects that we're looking to secure in the state. But it can't only be these programs. It has to be a holistic Team Michigan approach that begins with customer service, that continues through building our talented workforce, continuing to have a strong business climate, continuing to have the infrastructure and other resources that we need so that the incentives and tools, while they are critically important, can be the last component in to help us secure these types of deals. And while these tools are designed to support these large transformational types of projects, we are also continuously focusing on making sure that we have the tools and resources necessary to support high-tech entrepreneurs, small businesses that are on our main streets and our small manufacturers, communities, and the talented workforce here in the state as well. It's not only about securing these large types of projects, but it's about building the overall economy in every corner of the state. And we're going to continue to utilize this whole suite of resources and this approach to building a fast-growing, equitable, and resilient economy to keep ensuring that Michigan can lead the way out of the challenges that we've had from the pandemic and see growth occur in industries like electric vehicles and mobility, advanced manufacturing, research and development, engineering, and others to make sure that we're able to provide the pathway job opportunities and strong job prospects for Michiganders all over the state. And so with that, I just want to say thank you so much to you again, Arnold, for this time. Thank you to all of you for joining today's conversation. And I wanted to leave a lot of time here for open dialogue and open discussion, and just also a reiteration that after today, you can reach out to me anytime. The email address and phone number are on here. I'm happy to have more detailed conversations, one-on-one conversations, whatever any of you need, so that we can continue to keep up the incredible dialogue that we've had over the last period of time. So with that, thank you so much, and I can take any questions.
Thank you, Josh, for that presentation. Greatly do appreciate you taking time. We've currently got have no questions in the Q&A or chat box. So if anyone does have any, please put them in there. But I've got some myself, and the issue of economic development incentives and how big or how small, who they should be targeted at, how they should be used has been an ongoing conversation in state policy across the country for a number of years. I remember going back several years, working in the legislature and discussion over so-called PA 198s and their use and the like. So this is not a new discussion. And certainly part of that discussion really ramped up during the last administration, when many of our economic development incentives were removed from the field of play. And the debate has been ongoing since then. And certainly in light of the fact that other states use similar economic development incentives, means that, you know, you can't just unilaterally disarm and figure out that you're going to win these kinds of projects. On the other hand, there's a body of work out there from some economists that have continued on both sides, the left and the right, that have said, you know, these are not worth the taxpayer dollars that we put into them. We never get back in a return on investment. Has there, you know, does that discussion go on in MEDC? Where do you guys fall on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great discussion, and it's something that we do have and we take very seriously. I'll first kind of start on the micro level of each individual deal that we look at. We are required to look at what is the ROI to the state in terms of what's going to be coming back in terms of the net benefit compared to the costs that go into a project, as well as looking at other factors in terms of what's the payroll impact that will be generated from a project, what's the spin-off that can occur from the type of a project. And the tool that we use for that is the REMI software, Regional Economic Modeling Incorporated, which is a Massachusetts-based company, but utilized across the country in a lot of different ways to measure these types of incentives and measure these types of projects. And so I wanted to start there on that micro basis, say on every deal, whether it's that General Motors deal, you know, that was $7 billion of investment in the state and over $600 million of incentives, or it's a 20 job project that we're incenting with $200,000 of a grant. We're going to run that economic modeling on each and every deal. We also stay very closely involved with all of the research that's out there, in some degrees conducting our own research we have our own strategy and policy team that's constantly looking at how are we being most effective and how are we being successful with our tools. But we also have partnered with a lot of other groups to assess both the competitiveness and effectiveness for the taxpayers of our incentives, especially working closely with the Upjohn Institute in Kalamazoo. That's a leader in this space, that is an organization that recognizes the use of incentives and the need for incentives in situations, but also has pointed out that sometimes these incentives do outweigh the costs, outweigh the benefits. And so we've partnered with them to try to make sure that we're shaping our incentives in a way that is net beneficial for taxpayers. And a lot of that is around making sure that these tools are performance-based, making sure that money's owing at the door as companies perform, working to make sure that when at all possible and as strongly as we can, we're only using incentives in cases where that job creation investment wouldn't have happened in Michigan without the incentive. And that we're also looking at it from the standpoint of let's make sure we're putting the fewest amount of dollars of incentive into a project as we possibly can. And then when you really broaden it out beyond that research side of it, we also are always looking at it from the standpoint of, we never want to be leading with incentives as the primary reason that a company should be choosing Michigan as a place to locate. There will always be someone who's going to offer more incentives. There will always be somebody who will find ways to cut costs in that way. We want to make sure that we're focused on the overall quality of Michigan first in all of our efforts. We like to have that incentive conversation really to be the last conversation that we're having, and try to have as much growth in the state occur without the need for incentives. And so while we had to use incentives on something like the General Motors deal, that these incentives we believe are absolutely necessary for us to be competitive for many large transformational type of projects. We want to have both a strong toolkit of incentives, but also need to have a great business climate, and then want to be opportunistic about how and when we use those incentives, so they're a way that's balanced and beneficial for the taxpayers of the state.
Great. You mentioned Upjohn, and we've also done some work with them, in particular, Tim Bartik over there, who's written much on this, as I'm sure you know. I'm sure you've had discussions with Tim. And so I want to make that connection a little bit, because you mentioned clawbacks and you mentioned milestones. And certainly clawbacks and milestones are tools or tools that have been used before in incentive packages. And one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about in the use of incentives is how we can better use incentives to address issues such as the wage gap, such as skilled labor. Is MEDC, as they look at giving out such incentives, are any of these do any of these milestones in discussions with businesses talk about living wages, or making sure that we're paying good wages, or that the company is willing to also provide training for the workers that they need, and also how that relates, of course, to the issue of community benefit agreements, because I have a belief, and there's been some writing on this, that community benefit agreements have come up over the last 5 or 10 years, because the public's getting a little bit wiser about the incentive programs, and are looking for something within their community. If we're going to give out taxpayer dollars, what is that company going to give back to the community that they're in? So how does MEDC mesh all that together?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, beyond even just the MEDC, we need to make sure that we collectively are supporting individuals in the state in a way that we're properly funding the education system, that we're properly supporting our universities, that we are developing lifelong talent and training opportunities like the governor's Future Frontliners program and Michigan Reconnect and others. My wife is a 6th grade teacher, and so I'm very near and dear to my heart to see that we're funding schools across the state. And so it's got to go, before the MEDC and beyond the MEDC, that we have to start with the people in the state and the workforce and the future workforce. We have to make sure we're properly investing in them. And so then as you narrow that focus and look at what are we doing on individual deals that we are incenting, the MEDC strategy is focused on making sure that we are supporting projects that lead to either what we call good jobs or pathway jobs, which are research from the Brookings Institute that we worked with them on to ensure that not every job is going to be high paying, extremely high paying in its own right, but can it be a job that pays a living wage and then provides a pathway for growth to continue to move up in the economy. And so we are focused on having essentially all of our projects that we support meeting those definitions of jobs that can fully participate in the economy. The other metric that we look at is the ALICE threshold under the United Way, which is threshold that is in our mind, a better measurement of poverty and a better measurement of inability to fully participate in the economy, that takes into account a lot more things than the federal poverty rate. Essentially, we work very hard to not provide incentives for projects that are below that threshold. And if they are, we need to see what's the pathway to get above that threshold, what type of training and support, what type of wraparound benefits are being provided for the project, are all things that we look at holistically, overall as we're evaluating the types of projects to support. Within the individual projects and milestones and metrics that are in place, we have worked to have more of our tools have components that are about the funding going towards training and upskilling talent within the organization. And so building milestones around disbursements to support talent development of the team is something really, in my mind, one of or the best way to use these incentive funds. So that's something that we put in there as a milestone driven aspect of it. And then around the last part of it on community benefits agreements, while generally those are locally driven initiatives, it's not something the MEDC has a direct position on. An example of where that worked extremely well on a project that we worked on was the Fiat Chrysler automobiles expansion. At the time, Fiat Chrysler, now Stellantis, at the Mack engine plant in Detroit. The city of Detroit, FCA, and to a small extent, the MEDC in the state of Michigan engaged into this process to make sure that the company was hiring as many local Detroit residents as possible, that they had agreement about the way that the neighborhood around that plant could see the positive impacts of it. And so whether it's through the mechanism of a community benefits agreement or some other mechanisms, we do want to make sure in everything that we do that these projects that are located in communities are net benefits to the place where they are going. And one way to make sure of that is all of our work starts with conversations with the local communities, starts with making sure they're projects that the community wants to see. And then, hopefully we can execute in a way that those local residents are seeing and feeling the benefit of that project taking place in their community.
So you mentioned a few things there. Alice, of course, is the asset limited, income constrained, and employed measurement done by the United Way, which I agree is a very good metric for us to be using. So I'm pleased to hear that. The FCA project, on the other hand, you noted to hire as many Detroiters as possible. And that's where I think sometimes we get caught and we leave a little bit, maybe too much space for the employer there as possible. So again, my understanding is that as possible in this case meant that still many of those that were hired were non-Detroiters. And where is the line when we ask companies like FCA as possible also means you providing training to the Detroiters that don't meet the skill sets quite yet that you need, or wherever we are. But the one thing I do appreciate what you just said is pointing out that economic development, community development, it's all part of a broader ecosystem, which includes K-12 education, higher education, the workforce, the Michigan Works offices that we have, the CDCs like LEAP and SEMCOG and the Right Place, as well as our regional planning organizations working together to make it all happen. So I greatly appreciate what you have to say there. One other question that I have, and again, if anyone has any questions, please do use the Q&A box. When folks see hundreds of millions or billions of dollars being used for economic incentives for what typically are large projects, large manufacturing projects, many wonder what we're doing for smaller business and entrepreneurs in this state. every now and then the economic argument of hunting versus gardening, for instance, comes up. And when folks see these billions of dollars being spent on larger plants, they think that we're just going around and hunting out for the next larger plant, rather than just gardening those that we already have in our communities that are working to establish small businesses. And I know that the legislature just passed some tax relief for smaller businesses, but it is what is the focus, or what are the programs that the MEDC focuses on for smaller business and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something that we grapple with a lot at the MEDC and within all that partnership network that you mentioned. You step back first on that part. You mentioned a lot of the partners, and it's an overused term, but talking about economic development being a team sport. You mentioned a lot of those partners. Michigan can't be successful without all of those partners and many others working together, including, like we saw with the incredible partnership with the legislature, over the last several months in terms of getting the SOAR legislation completed and the great relationships in that space, and trying to really bring when we're working with a business or we're working with an entrepreneur, they're not thinking about, am I working with the acronym of the MEDC, or am I working with the acronym of the LEAP, the Lansing Economic Area Partnership, or whoever else. They're thinking about what is their interaction with Michigan, or what we like to call Team Michigan. And so we want to make sure that this is a partnership every step of the way, so that every customer is getting the best support they can. And I think we're really moving well into that direction. In terms of seeing the big types of support and these big announcements around something like these large manufacturing opportunities, those are certainly the things that get the headlines, that are in the news, that you see about big incentives and things like that. While like the General Motors investment only took place in Lansing Delta Township and Orion Township, we do believe that project, one of the reasons to support that project is because of the impact that an auto plant has on the surrounding communities and then the broader supply chain of the whole state. And so small to medium size businesses of all types and in a lot of corners of the state will see the benefit from that project. But we also can't depend on that type of support alone being the way that support, that small to medium sized businesses and communities see support from the MEDC. About 80 to 90% of the work that we do, certainly in terms of interactions that we have, is work with in-state Michigan businesses and entrepreneurs. And the attraction component of what we do may land some large wins and is important because we need to continue to grow Michigan. We're going to be most successful when we see our current companies that are in the state choosing to stay and grow here in Michigan. And so we can support those projects if they have growth opportunities with the same incentive tools that we have here for state companies we're trying to attract to the state. But we also have many non-financial tools like our Peer Michigan Business Connects program that connects Michigan buyers to suppliers to continue to build out the supply chain so that a small business can get a new contract that goes a lot longer than a one-time incentive. We also have tools like our international trade program that really leads the nation in a lot of ways and is designed to help businesses that are looking to export for the first time, get grants and get assistance to help them move into that new market, and then get long-term business that helps them be successful. We also partner very closely and provide funding for groups like the Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center that's centered around supporting small manufacturers, and the Michigan Small Business Development Centers that work with both Main Street businesses and tech businesses to help them succeed. And then we also work very closely on how do we support really two other types of small businesses. First being a high-tech entrepreneur type of a business that's either coming out of a university or coming out of some other type of new technology. we have a whole suite of services and financial tools to help them start, grow, and hopefully stay in Michigan over the long term, whether it's equity infusions or grants to support initial research and development. But then the other side of it is we also need to make sure we're continuing to support our small Main Street businesses. I'm using Main Street business very broadly beyond just the Main Street, but our small businesses in every corner of the state. Frankly, that had not been something the MEDC had directly been supporting enough over many years. We've partnered with the Small Business Development Center and others, but it's something that we recognized really at the start of the pandemic. We needed to directly be doing more ourselves in that space. And we stood up a lot of programming that helped thousands of small businesses throughout the pandemic. But we recognize that needs to continue and we need to do more. And one area that we're going to see that change, and it's a small change, but it's a big impact to us, is for the first time as a part of our strategic plan that we're going to be recommending to our board next week, we're going to be recommending that we elevate a pillar of our strategy that is solely dedicated to these Main Street small businesses, so that we renew and build and amplify our emphasis, not only on the high-tech side of small business, but on all small businesses. Because of that interconnected nature, a great small business network in a community builds a more vibrant community that then creates a system where talented people want to live. And then ultimately, these larger businesses want to locate in communities where talented people want to live, and there's a vibrancy in the community. And so it's really a circle that you have to do all components to it: support business, support talent, support community, because all of them interplay and work together.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, several years ago, as co-chair of the Michigan Sense of Place Council, we came up with the paradigm that, you know, place needs business, business needs talent, and talent needs place. So that's what you're talking about there. And so,
yeah, I can see that circle right now in my. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a lot of work with business community and communities at large in developing that notion and that narrative. And I think it still holds true today. One more question for you before you go, and I greatly appreciate you taking time this morning. What is your relationship with community and community leaders, whether at the neighborhood or local government level, as you move forward with the relationships you have with big and small businesses? How do you engage local leaders?
Yeah, there's multiple ways that we do that. And so we have strong relationships with local economic development organizations like we have talked about, but we also have relationships with municipalities directly, downtown development authorities, and also various different chambers, especially diverse chambers, have been something that we've really worked hard on, ensuring that we're getting into neighborhood groups, that we're getting into different types of businesses than we've supported in the past, making sure that we're not just continuing to try to do the same things that we've always done and expect that to bring growth in every corner of the state. And so one thing that we've really emphasized has been, how can we make sure we put in our scorecard that we measure ourselves on, making sure that we're supporting new customers. And so we're not just seeing the same customers over and over receiving support from the MEDC and our partners, but that new businesses, new entrepreneurs are seeing the support of those tools. And the best way to do that is by us spending time geographically in every corner of the state, and us partnering with various municipal leaders, local service providers, and others to be on the ground, have conversations, and make sure that we're really listening to ensure that our tools are supporting the needs of businesses, small and large, in every corner of the state.
Well, again, Josh, great conversation. Thank you for your work. Thank you for taking time this morning. Great presentation for our staff to better understand how the MEDC works, what your philosophies are, and the new Economic Development Incentive Program. So thank you very much for being with us. And to
Thank
those in
you.
attendance, you're welcome. Appreciate it. And to those in attendance, we're going to take a break now till 11 o'clock. Please do rejoin us at 11 when we'll be hearing from many of your peers on staff in professional development sessions on constituent relations, communications, and career advancement. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you shortly. Again, welcome back, everybody, and thank you for being with us this morning. We've got a great hour of information in our professional development sessions from many of your peers. And the first panel will dive into constituent relations. And with us on that panel is Bob Anderson and Jimmy Johnson of the House Republican Caucus, and Rachel Sakan of the Democratic Caucus of the Michigan House of Representatives. So I'm not sure who amongst the three of you is going to kick us off, but whoever it is, you have the floor.
Well, thanks, Arnold. I guess I can. I'm first on this list here, so I have no problem going. Can everybody hear me okay, I hope? I think so. Okay. Well, thank you guys. I apologize for my background. My wife and I just landed in Puerto Rico late last night. So we have a wedding here today and this weekend. So there's a lot of alcohol bottles in the background. If you hear some salsa music, I apologize. But my name is Bob Anderson. I've worked at the House of Representatives for about 6 years now. I'm a graduate of SVSU, Saginaw Valley State University in 2011 with a degree in political science. I did a couple short stints in Mississippi and Alabama after that, working for some school choice PACs and former Speaker of the House down there. I've also worked in, the Michigan House of Representatives for 6 years for caucus services, several members, a couple speakers of the House. And I am currently the chairman of the Saginaw County Republican Party as well. And look, do you want just intros, Arnold, or are we going to go into it?
Yep, go into it.
Okay, yep, I'll be quick. I don't have anything, earth-shattering to share with staff, but I do have some tips and pointers that, I never thought I'd have a successful career down there. I really didn't. I'm 35. I kind of started in the game a little bit late and never thought I'd be a Lansing guy, but I'm very glad I am. And just some simple things like detail-oriented, don't cut corners, obvious why that's important. Planning timelines are key to success, and prioritizing. We all get a full plate all the time, and sometimes it feels like you're drinking water through a fire hose, but you just gotta, prioritize what's important, make your boss look good as possible. I try to outwork and out hustle those around you. If you see my car in the Roosevelt ramp, I have a Titleist golf sticker on the back. It's on the second row. I'm there at 8 o'clock every day. I live in Saginaw, but I get up early and come there every single day before 9. Not that I'm trying to kiss butt or anything like that. It's just believe it or not, you are allowed to come in the door whenever you want. So you don't have to be showing up at 8:59, 9:05 on the dot. I try to get there early, stay a little bit late when necessary, of course. I'm not a very policy oriented person. Even though I'm a legislative director or backdesker, I am a campaigner. That's where I've made my bread and butter my entire life. And I've had to work on a lot of the policy stuff. So work on your weak spots, know what you're bad at, and try to get better. Ask questions to those that you might not reach out to. I've become really good friends with a lot of people in our House Republican policy office for that reason, because I'm not too solid on the policy. To me, it's like bland and boring, but those guys do a really good job. And I know the Dems do as well, do a really good job of breaking it down so we can understand it. And my boss is a great guy. He's a novice. We beat a 2-term incumbent. He's a meat guy. If you know, Timmy Beeson is my boss, and he's truly a butcher at heart. So he didn't know a lot about politics. So him and I have been learning a lot together. It's been a great experience. He was actually just voted MERS Freshman Legislator of the Year. And a lot of that is because he's really dug in, and we've really put in the extra time to bone up on what we're not good at. I was a caucus service member, which Jimmy is now, caucus service advisor. Utilize those guys. I know the Dems have them too. utilize those people. They are basically your incumbency protection plan internally in the house right now. Use them. They have great pitches for comm stuff, which Christina and Greg are going to talk about. They have great tribute opportunities, infographics. Use that stuff. It's super crucial to get on board with that. Communication with your coworkers is key. I've worked in several offices where when I was a front desker, I didn't really click with the back desker, and it caused a lot of chaos. It really did. And sometimes things weren't getting communicated to the boss properly. So I now have a front desker that him and I talk, consistently every day, even about the small stuff. And I actually do our scheduling, which is kind of rare for most offices, just because I wanted to take that off my front desker's plate. I'm not saying that every office should do that, but I'm kind of anal about my personal calendar anyway. So if I might as well, I'm staring at mine for 10 hours a day, I might as well stare at my boss's too. And it lessens a lot of that conflict that sometimes the front desk might forget something. So I just took it on my plate. That way he can focus on more of the constituent relations stuff. And then lastly, I think I mentioned it already, but reach out to the more experienced staff for help. Working in the speaker's office, the last speaker, the one who was kind of been in the news lately, that's another story. I worked for his office, and senior staff is popping in left and right, and all these people and all these meetings, and get to know them, shake their hand to say, hey, I'm Bob, hey, I'm whoever. And I'd love to sit down and, have lunch with you, send follow-up notes, send follow-up emails. It's, again, nothing earth-shattering, but it's, really important stuff. And I've, had a pretty successful career at it thus far. So that's all I got, Arnold. I don't.
No, that's great, Bob. That's a great start. That is a great start. Great experience. Appreciate your work as a former legislative aide or back desker myself, as well as a policy guy. I'm glad for your experiences as a campaign person. So great perspective. Appreciate your work, showing up early and making sure you're working with your boss. Why don't we move to Rachel next? Kind of split this up. Move on. Rachel, why don't you talk a bit about where you work and your experiences?
So I am the front desk for Rep. Julie Brixey. I do constituent relations, but it's kind of an ironic day for this because it's actually my last day doing that, and I'm moving to the back on Monday, which is very exciting. But before that, so I was at MSU for college, and I was in the James Madison program, and I started interning for Adam Zemke back in 2017. And then I got pulled into Minority Leader Sam Singh's office pretty quick. And so I've been here since 2017 already, pretty much doing exclusively constituent services. But I've been with Julie since she started in 2018. And that's been a great experience. And I'm really excited to go to the next step with that. But so I don't have quite the variety that Bob has, but a ton of experience doing constituent relations already and being around the Hob. And a lot of the job, I think, for both the front and the back desk is the institutional knowledge and knowing who to call and knowing you have all these resources. I don't remember how I even learned all this when I started as an intern. Obviously, no one was just telling me everything, but after being here for so long, you kind of know that there's someone who can answer everything. So you never have to really not know. And that's huge. So my coworker actually in Julie Brixey's office has been here for almost 10 years. And Dan Opsmer is just incredible and knows everything, but which feels daunting, but that institutional knowledge is huge. And you can always find someone to tell you what you don't know here, which is great. So that's where I am, but I would say, just to start and give a little bit of what Bob said, some of the biggest qualities that have come to play here is honestly being kind of forthcoming and friendly and empathetic, both with your boss and your colleagues and your coworkers and lobbyists, but also with the constituents. I always say the fact that I'm not afraid of my boss, I think, has come to be a huge strength. I know not everyone can really choose to not be afraid of their boss. Sometimes that situation is just different for offices, but being able to go to my boss for anything, being able to stop her and say, I need you to look at this, and being able to ask questions and not hemming and hawing about whether or not I should bother them is really helpful. So kind of what Bob was saying about establishing good relationships with the people you're working with, it's just so much more productive when you can kind of speak freely and not have to worry. But the other part is not always second guessing everything and being a little bit decisive. There's literally not enough time in the day to do everything that we have to do. And so you do have to prioritize, but also sometimes, and I do this because I don't know, sometimes this is a weakness. I can get too worried about something. Like if I come into the office and there's, let's say, a voicemail and it sounds like a tricky constituent case, sometimes I might worry and put it off a little and try to brainstorm before I even call them back. And then half the time when I finally do, it's really simple. And the person will be like, thank you so much for the call. And so sometimes you just need to act quick and be decisive instead of wasting your time, because a lot of times things will get resolved more simply than you expect.
Julie, can I ask how, Rachel, can I ask how you've made the decision to move from the front to the back, or was that an opportunity, or?
Well, yeah, it's mostly an opportunity, actually. I've been in the front for a long time and have wanted to try new things, but I, again, have this great relationship with my boss and my coworker, and we had such a great dynamic. So I wasn't looking at jumping to another office, which there's nothing wrong if you do, but I just knew I probably wouldn't have such a great system anywhere else. And so that wasn't a priority, but my back desk Dan is leaving. And so that's why I'm bumping up, but I'm really excited. It's what I've always wanted to do. And I feel like I have literally learned everything there is to learn about constituent services. So I'm also excited to just have to learn new things. It does reach a point where you stop being challenged, but the cases are still hard. So you kind of lose the benefits and only get the negative, which can be a bit draining. But that took a few years to get there, and there's plenty of opportunities around the Hob if anyone else ends up there.
Great perspective. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think, well, back when I did constituent relations first before I moved into the committee work that my boss was doing, and so on and so forth. So it's a great learning experience to do constituent relations, because many times that's where we found ideas for legislation. You talk to constituents about their problems and what they're going through, and you go, maybe we can do something about that. So thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, actually, that's a really good example. We're on oversight committee, which is quite the animal, but every week, a lot of times the topic is exactly what I've been dealing with on the constituent side. So it has been a really helpful transition, because I've already been working with my back desk and telling them what's happening. And so kind of creating that dialogue early between your constituent work and your policy work is very helpful, because now I feel a lot more prepared.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a great help to Representative Brixey moving forward. Jimmy? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks, Arnold, for putting this together. Really excited to be able to share a little bit of my experience here with everyone. Like Bob and what Rachel had said, I'd say one of the first things that's going to be really important here as a front desk is, being detail oriented and being open to new ideas. When you're talking to constituents, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that you're most likely going to be the closest your constituent is going to get to talking to their representative. That is something to really keep in mind, because when someone reaches out to your office, a lot of the times it's not going to be, to say, hey, you guys are doing a really great job, really proud of the work you're doing. Usually it's going to be an unemployment issue, food stamps, just various issues around the state. And if you can go and answer those questions for them quickly, professionally, promptly, they're going to remember that. Going off of what Bob said, it's honestly, if your boss is a first termer, a second termer, this is really good for protecting their incumbency as well, because they're going to remember that interaction that they had with your office. I can't tell you how many times, over the last 4 years with Speaker Wentworth, how many different issues that we had that had popped up, either an intern, myself, someone had talked to them, and then next thing you know, the speaker is in the district
And then they'll come up and be like, hey, I am like really thankful, that person was able to answer that question for me very quickly, very professionally. And that looks really good on your office. So that's always something that you want to keep in mind, that you are that first point of contact. Now, in my experience with every office, every office is going to be a little bit different. So I did a little bit of scheduling here or there, depending on what we were working on. So I did our back desk scheduling. Now we had in the speaker's office, you have a much larger staff. So we have like 2 staff that are specifically for the speaker. You'll have somebody that's doing offsite stuff, somebody that's doing the in-office work. But then, sometimes the chief of staff or the chief operating officer or even your legislative director will need to have some meetings. So, you'll schedule those, and it's a really good way, to learn how to be detail oriented. Every little detail, you're going to want to let your boss know, just so they're not going in there and they're absolutely surprised at what they're walking into. So it could be something really small even. So let's say there's a dinner. Is it a strolling dinner? Is it a sit down dinner? These are all things to keep in mind, because then your boss is going to be prepared for that, But I would say, the number one thing is taking pride in the casework that you are doing. I know for a lot of us staff, when the pandemic first started, I think every single one of us had thousands and thousands of unemployment requests. And, in the beginning, it was really overwhelming for all of us. You're getting hundreds of calls a day and everybody is having an extremely bad day. They aren't able to go to work. They need to get their money. So when you can make them feel good, knowing that, hey, we're representing you, we're going to look into this, we want to get you that money as quickly as possible. That looks really good, not only for your office, but also for your boss, because they know that they have put in, people in place that truly care about what's taking place in the district. One thing that I would really recommend for staff is, I know a lot of people, they have their interns do happy notes where, you're scrolling through the newspaper and you're looking for something important that happened in district. I even recommend every front desk to do the exact same thing, because there could be something really big in there that maybe, you're really busy that day. You're just going to be giving that to your intern. You might miss a really crucial factor or a really crucial piece of information that had popped up. For us, we had the dams break up in Gladwin and the Midland areas. So right off the bat, in the newspaper, there are different organizations, for instance, that were providing different services for people that had been affected by those floods. Being able to find that stuff in the newspaper, sometimes it's not posted online. That's why I recommend, going through that newspaper, because you can have that information right then and there. So if someone calls, hey, my well dried up because of the flood, I have water damage in my house, all these different things, then you are automatically completely prepared, saying, hey, okay, so you have this organization, this organization, this organization, give them a call. You got to see yourself as, not only a spokesperson for your boss, the first point of contact for your boss for the district, but also, you're a resource center in a sense as well for your constituents. So you're kind of like a multi-pronged tool, is a really good way of looking at that for your constituents. And yeah, so I would just say, staying on top of all of those things. I'd say casework is honestly one of the most important things for any office. If you're not doing your casework, then that's going to reflect horribly in your district. And making sure on top of that, not only you're doing your casework, but you're going to be doing that in as efficient of a manner as possible. If someone's just calling saying, hey, when does deer season start? You're not going to want to call back 2 weeks later and be like, oh, hey, I just found, hopefully, preferably, hopefully you already know that. If not, you can get that within a few minutes, get that back to them. But, staying on top of all that stuff, quick responses, solving that casework as quickly as possible. And, just being open, reminding those constituents, hey, maybe I didn't give you the answer today that you're looking for, but you run into any other issues, please give us another call, and, hopefully we can assist you at that point. So I would just say, customer service, staying on top of it, being efficient, being effective. I would say those are going to be those main keys that you're going to want to focus on as a front desk.
Greatly appreciate that perspective and that of Bob and Rachel. And I have to thank Lisa Curtis for pulling you all together today. I'm just moderating here, but you three certainly, for me as a former staffer, have exemplified what the most important roles are and the duties that you do. And you've once again proved some constants, right? Casework, constituent work is what's going to get your bosses reelected, flat out. not pushing a green or a red button, but that communication back. We used to have a 24-hour rule in our office, even if that meant telling the person we're researching it, don't have an answer for you yet, but we're getting there. So greatly appreciated. And I don't want to forget that Katie Okowski is also here with us for this session. And Katie, want to give you a chance to chime in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Arnold. And no worries. I know it's a lot to hear from constituent services. And but yeah, my name is Katie Okowski. I graduated from MSU back in 2019, and I've been working in Rep Carey's office as his front desker and constituent services manager for a little over a year now. My 2 cents to this discussion is just to really remember and be empathetic with the people that you're talking to. I think it's really easy to disconnect ourselves over the phone, or if you're answering Facebook messages, to think that, these people are far away, they're removed, their problems aren't my problems. And I know in a sense that you need that kind of mental block, especially when we deal with heavy casework involving mental health, MDHHS, all that kind of stuff. And it's healthy to have that distance, but to also remember that, on the 38th UIA call of the day, that these folks aren't just, calling to annoy our state rep and to come bother us. It's because we are like the last stopping point. They've probably had to dig to come find you in the first place, is something to remember. And that, we all get frustrated, and we are kind of their, well, not their last stop, but one of their final stops in trying to get something resolved. And just really think about that and try to pull back our own frustrations when the constituent is obviously sometimes upset or frustrated with their own circumstances, and just to accept that we need to do the best that we can to help them, even if it's, they aren't approaching us in the correct manner, and to take that distance and space. It's also just really important to think that, hey, we've been there. I always try and think when I'm on the phone with somebody that I'm talking to them as if I am physically standing in front of them, rather than just mind-blankingly, just talking. I try to keep a smile on my face, because they can hear your tone and the inflections in that, and that will take great lengths in, resolving a situation, or even just being able to have that back and forth with a constituent, about their personal life. If they have a detail, grab onto that, say something, communicate it back to them, make it more personal. Try and make them understand that, after they've, had their thousands called UI agents who don't seem to care, or they've been on the phone with T-Mobile all day, that we're real people and they're real people, and we're here to help them. And that's my 2 cents for constituent relations.
Well, that's a great 2 cents. As all of your 2 cents have been great. I mean, like I said, this is a great panel, great advice, great perspective for those watching. I'm glad we're taping this as well, because I think that this would, for those that couldn't be with us today, I think all of you have done a great job of saying what it is you do and how to communicate with constituents. I think as you just noted, Katie, when you pick up the phone, you don't know if they voted for your boss or not. All you know is that they're calling you with a problem. And how do you work through that problem? And as I said, I think Jimmy and all of you have kind of hinted around it, but Jimmy was pretty direct about constituent casework is what's going to get your boss reelected, because when they go home for the weekend, and some of you may live in that district, some of you may not, but when they go home for the weekend or after session is done, they're having coffees, they're seeing people on the street, in the grocery store, and so on and so forth. And all you need is one bad constituent experience to blow up on social media, and it will negate the other 99 great experiences that you've had. So thank you all for your perspectives. I'd like to move on a little bit right now to communications. And we've got a couple of people, and the others probably too at some point could chime in, but Greg Hool, who's with the Democratic Caucus, and Christian Dorr, who is with the Republican Caucus, are here to talk to us about constituent communication. So Christina, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Arnold. That's okay. So I'm Christina. I've been with the House Communications Office in the Republican side for about 6 years. My background before this was in journalism. So I graduated from CMU in 2008 with a degree in journalism. And then I spent like 7 years over in Shiawassee County at the daily paper there, working as an editor and government reporter, kind of covering mostly their county government with a little bit of delving into like statewide policy stuff. So it's been great here. Like, I feel like I've learned a lot. I mean, I knew how to write before, but like writing for representatives and like kind of writing about their work and like sharing the good they're doing is a little different than journalism. So I guess I'll just share a few tips. I want to make sure there's time for questions if you guys have them too. But I would say that one of the most important things when communicating like effectively is to be resourceful and make sure you understand and ask questions, like fully understand a topic before you go and try to sit down and write about it or explain it to someone, because otherwise it's going to show through. If someone asks one question and you can't delve any deeper and you're just like, well, I copied and pasted this sentence from a policy analysis and I don't really know, it's going to show through and reflect poorly on you. So just make sure you really understand something, and that's going to help you communicate it more effectively and clearly and concisely to someone. I would say that especially communicating with constituents and people back home, one thing that maybe you're tempted to do because you think it makes you look important or cool, or to use like the language we use around the house, like to throw out blue back or codify or words like that, they don't have a big meaning to the people back home. So I think the more you can kind of simplify something and I guess dumb it down to like a lower reading level, lower, like understanding, these are people, you're talking to people who don't live and breathe and work in Lansing every day. So like I might say, instead of codify something, we're working on something to make our laws more clear and easier to understand for people. So just putting some effort into the words you're using, I think is really helpful to people back home. Don't just like list off what a bill does, make an effort to like show the problem and this is why you're proposing a solution and this is what the solution does.
Thanks, Christina. Okay,
yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Greg, talk a little bit about your experience. I don't know if you work for an office or right on the communication staff.
Sure. So I work for central staff for the Democratic Caucus in the House. I run the Member Services Department, which is, we help with constituent outreach. So there's a comms department that does a lot of the writing, but anything as far as constituent outreach, like text campaigns, robocalls, legislative canvassing, events, town halls, anything like that, we have a hand in. I took a bit of a circuitous route to this office. Most people come up through the legislature. I actually have a background in housing. I was a realtor for a long time and worked for Habitat for Humanity before I came to the House, which is actually where I recognize Bob. Because I didn't say anything before because like I said, I was named interim director of our department a week ago, and so when I saw you, I was nervous that you were a staffer that I didn't know, and I didn't want to look stupid. But then I realized I think I met you when you worked for the former speaker when I worked for Habitat, and you were very welcoming. So anyway, let me get on with it because I see that drink ticket on your wrist and I don't want to keep you long. But anyway, I think it's hard to follow up what everybody has already said, but I think you know, the best advice I got was with my first broker when I was in real estate. He said, "Kiss." I was like, "What?" "Keep it simple, stupid." Just keep it simple, stupid. First of all, you gotta communicate to a 4th grade reading level. But second of all, you need to understand what's gonna happen with the communications you're putting out to your folks. They're gonna, if it's a mail piece, they're gonna look at it and throw it in the trash. Yes, they're gonna get it and they're gonna look at it, but then they're gonna throw it in the trash. So it's not about what you want to convey to them. It's about what they are willing to have conveyed to them, okay? Which is a very different thing. So when you're thinking about how you're communicating with your constituents, no matter what it is, it's about what they're gonna actually hear. If it's an email, if it's an e-newsletter, if it's a text, if it's whatever, you need to understand how they're going to receive it and what they're going to do with it after that. And you know what? Guess what? People don't read. So remember that. And the reason that I want to emphasize that is because I assume there's a lot of folks on here that are in college or coming right out of college. And I know that was a hard thing when I became a professional. When I graduated from college and became a professional, that was a hard adjustment, because when you're in college, you're writing papers, you're doing research, you're writing essays. And guess what? The people that you submit those things to actually read them. But out here in the real world, that's not what happens. And okay, one more thing that I'll throw out there for the college folk: we plagiarize out here in the real world. We see what other people have already written and we use that again. And
It's
if
called
it's
not
good,
reinventing the wheel.
So I'm not saying do that for your papers. And don't, if you plagiarize something and your professor says you plagiarize this, you're kicked out of college. Don't say, "I was on a call and I was told this was okay and this is what professionals do." Don't say that. But yes, look at other people's work and use it and keep it simple. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I was told several years ago, the new R&D is recopy and duplicate. So yeah, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Great stuff. So I do have a question for Greg, or whoever can answer it. Someone's asked, any tips for organizing town halls?
Yes, depends on who's asking.
It was Elizabeth Crenshaw,
as far as I guess that's kind of a vague question. Is there any more? I do want to be helpful. As far as organizing town halls, you have to think about your audience, you have to think about your location, there's those basics, but is there a specific question there?
Let's see if we can unmute. Well, I would think.
While you're thinking of a more specific question, can I also say, I have to point out my white shirt. My girlfriend was making fun of me. She thought I was dressing up for this, sitting here in my pajamas with a dress shirt on. It's White Shirt Day, which is an important day here in Genesee County. It's the anniversary of the sit-downers strike, which basically started the labor movement in this country. Don't worry, Katie, I won't tell JD you're not wearing a white shirt. But
thank you for that history.
Anyway, that's it.
So
I own one right now.
Just some useful tips on town halls. Maybe Bob can answer that too. How do you organize around a particular issue, especially when you want a group of constituents? When's a good time to do a town hall, for instance? Weekend, evening, taking into account people's schedules. Where do you hold them? Do you hold them at City Hall or the township offices, at a local high school, and so on and so forth? And how do you reach out to those folks that you want there? So any tips?
So I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I can tell you a funny story about what not to do at a town hall.
Yeah, that's always helpful.
My old boss, again, the one who's been in the news lately, he also had a situation where he accidentally took a gun into an airport. I didn't know that was going to happen. I had set up a town hall at that airport. So he does it. The news breaks. 2 weeks later, our town hall's at that airport, and it was not a good situation at all. So don't do that. Definitely don't do that. But Arnold, I think you're right. Find your audience, find the right thing you want to talk about. I've been to a bunch of them that are great. That we had like a DNR when chronic wasting disease was going around. Jim Lauer, former rep Jim Lauer, hosted a town hall, and it was huge. It was packed. We had the DNR join us, like call the department, have an expert on hand. If you're talking about COVID stuff, obviously have an expert. These are our bosses and reps are not experts. I'm not an expert. So have somebody there it almost takes the burden off you too a little bit. It's easier for your boss to defer to that person who is an expert. So that's really the only tip I have.
If it's a town hall, then there's different types of events. If it's a coffee hour, that's something that should be regular at the same place. But if it's a town hall, that's on a specific subject. Okay, so what is your specific subject? If your subject, for example, depending on your subject, that dictates the rest of your time, your location, and everything. So if your topic is education, if it's a school town hall, then your audience then is probably parents, teachers, people who have stakes in schooling. So, maybe you want to have it at a school, at a place that's, convenient for schooling, but also maybe you don't want to have it in the middle of the day because your parents are working and things like that. So, it really depends on kind of what your topic is, and then and then that'll show you who your audience is, which should dictate where and what time it should be. I feel like that's vague, but
No, it's good. It's good. Thank you. And again, I want to thank you all for taking time this morning. What a great discussion this has been. Great panel. Refreshing for me that some things remain constant. So that's good. I just want to review a couple of things before we move on to our next speaker. Be sure to have empathy and listening to the constituents that call in, even if it's 35th unemployment call you've gotten that day. There are resources available to you right here on this panel, right throughout your colleagues on staff. I know that when I was on staff, I had great relations with staff on the other side of the aisle. We were just all working for our bosses, right? So how do you do that in the best way possible? And would have great conversations with them about doing that. It's okay to say, I don't know. Don't lie your way through a constituent call. Say, hey, I don't know, but I'll get back with you. We'll find that information. And lastly, don't burn any bridges, because you never know where you're going to wind up, or who you're going to run into, and certainly don't want to do that when you're working on behalf of your boss. So again, I want to thank everyone here for their time this morning. More than welcome to stick around. And as we hear from our next speaker to talk about career advancement, which is always a question that we get and that we like to cover at these sessions, especially on professional development. And our speaker is Brendan Ringlever. Brendan is with Michigan Legislative Consultants, but he began his career in the legislature, serving in various roles for more than a decade, including Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director to the Senate Majority Leader. So Brendan, why don't you take it away?
Arnold, thanks. This is great. And I've been on for this since 11 o'clock, and noticed there's a lot of familiar names from folks that we cross paths with over in both the Hobb and the Binsfeld office building. But I got to tell you, I started on staff back in 1993 in February, almost, it's I guess 29 years ago this month, but 30 years in the industry right now. And I will tell you, hearing some of the stories and the suggestions that were provided, both on the comms front and constituent front, in a good way, things really haven't changed. The system hasn't changed, and that's probably a good thing. Some of the processes have changed, and the people, of course, have changed a lot. Arnold and I were on staff together way back in the day, and now he is in a very important position with Dr. Grossman over at MSU. What you do is awesome, and I implore folks in listening here, make sure you peruse the MPLP website, and if you feel like you're a candidate for MPLP, that's an incredible way to grow as a person, not just a staff member. So Arnold, just a quick introduction for the folks. I'm a partner at Michigan Legislative Consultants. We're just right across the street from the Romney Building, right around the corner from you guys. And we're the state's oldest multi-client lobby firm. If you have any questions, I want this to be the start of a dialogue, not just a quick presentation. So that's the industry we're in, is communications, networking, and that will help all of you lead to better decision-making when you're offered jobs in the future. But as I said, our firm represents a wide swath of clients in and around Michigan and nationally, as well as, other multi-client firms that you intersect with. We all have that same, probably a similar client base, different clients, but different similar subject matter. And all of them have, all of our firms collectively have a footprint in your districts, and you probably answer questions that some of our clients would be interested in or could be helpful with, whether that's nursing home industries, whether that's one of our clients is McDonald's, they're definitely in everybody's district, whether that's the ophthalmologists, or if it's, maybe not in every district, but in Uber issues, we represent Uber. So a wide swath of clients. I started again 30 years ago in the business, and I lived my first few time in the Capitol. My first office was in the Capitol on the 4th floor as a committee clerk. And I'm sharing this with you only because of the path that it was over a 12 and a half year legislative career, then transitioning to where I am today. I started a job on the 4th floor of the Capitol as a committee clerk. It was a great job. Being the parliamentarian for a committee, a lot of folks look and say, why? I think Doug Simon's on here, so he'll appreciate this. But, a lot of times those are overlooked nonpartisan folks. But sitting up right next to, as my first real job, next to the committee chair of the committee and a minority vice chair, I was working in split majority. So every month, the gavel was passed from a Republican chairperson to a Democrat chairperson. One of those chairs of the Liquor Control Committee at the time is Diane Byram over at MSU. That's how I got to know Diane. I say this because the most unique situations in what you do today, you're in a very unique role that most people are somewhat envious of. So don't think that your jobs are not important on days that you're taking 50 UIA calls. It's grueling work. You have exceedingly important jobs. And down to the role of a committee clerk, I realized after I left that job what an important part of the process that job is. It doesn't feel like it day to day when you're taking minutes and sending out notices of committees, but it was an important part of the system. When you're working in the front desk, or I want to share this. The few takeaways, because I really want to see if there's questions about life and life after being on staff, or life opportunities to maybe enhance your role within the office today, your current role, or what other opportunities you're looking at. We can talk after this as well, if anybody wants to get a hold of me. But takeaways for today, again, the jobs you have are important. Government's a very big and serious business. And all the positions that you guys control people's lives, and you have to look at it through that lens. And that's very serious business. Number two, all industries, sectors, businesses, social movements, all intersect here in this little 8-block area of craziness we call the capital city. Think about it. If you need an answer to a question, it's a phone call away. If you need to resolve a problem or help resolve a problem or navigate an issue, it's just a phone call away. Most people out of our 10 million residents don't have that ability. You have that ability. It's powerful. But not only is that powerful, the people you're calling are already part of your network. If you think about it, even though you don't know the government affairs director at Uber, let's say, or McDonald's, that person is only a phone call away, whether that's through me or directly to that person, to resolve issues or maybe look for ideas. Those are powerful positions that you're in today. And that doesn't matter if you're in the front or back desk. You got to start somewhere. And after I was a committee clerk, I was a front desker, a back desker, moved to caucus services, and then was a ledge director over in the Senate, and then became ledge director for the majority leader. I actually married a staffer that was a ledge director for the majority leader in the Senate too. So it is a small town at times. But meet all the people you can as well. That's my other suggestion. I know it's easy to say, hard to do at times. There's a ton of opportunity to meet folks. And just because you might not be interested in their business or their politics, don't ignore them. Your path will intersect at some time in the future, whether that's when you're working on a legislative issue a month from now, or in some cases 20, 25 years ago, like Arnold and my paths cross again, which is great. So that being said, be helpful to others, provide advice to others. If you don't know the answer, just tell them. I think somebody said that on the constituent relations front. But for you in the Haber, the Binsfeld buildings, if you can't help them directly, or if it's a lobbyist too, not just a coworker, point them to somebody who can, and they will always, that gives you value, is just being able, you don't always have to chase down every answer. There's not enough time in the day. Just connect them with somebody who can answer it for them. It's very efficient use of your time. And grow by inserting yourself in meetings and asking a lot of questions. Oftentimes, and forgive me, somebody mentioned this earlier about being scared of your boss. I think that was the word somebody used. That happens. That's called early staff years. Then you realize how to navigate that and build confidence that probably in a term limited era, in a very short amount of time, you're going to know more than most of the bosses. And that's power. Information's power too. I often say, share the power when you can, share the information when you can, because that inserts you into discussions and people start talking about you. If it's confidential information, keep it confidential. But as somebody who rose through the ranks in the House, I just want to get just a little advice. You can jump from the front desk to the back desk quickly. You can jump from the back desk to the lobby core or to something else quickly. Quick is not always good. You need to know, I always say, don't rush it and do the little things well. And this goes for trying to navigate what's next. Both roles are absolutely critical, and both you'll be introduced to so many people. Use those people as sounding boards. Don't just collect their card, ask for their card first. Don't just collect it and throw it on your desk in a pile without ever intending to follow up or chatting with those people. Follow up with them. If you have downtime, reach out to them. Don't always put it on, if it's a lobbyist, for instance, don't always put it back on them to reach out to you. Just go ahead and call them. Grab coffee with them. Maybe they'll come over to the office, bring coffee for you and your coworker on a Friday, just to touch base. There's nothing better. Many of the lobbyists in town served in roles like what you're serving in today. And they love talking about their time in those roles because they're a lot of fun. They can be. Don't jump too early, learn, don't rush it, but use it as an opportunity to learn how to effectively explain complex issues in a simple and effective way. Communicate well. And responding to constituents will definitely help you prepare and teach you how to distill issues. That's the hardest part. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, is the elevator pitch, or maybe a little bit broader than an elevator pitch, is important in this town. But it's also important in other industries as well. If you decide to get out of politics, if you're a constituent person today or a staff person that wants to move into the corporate world, marketing, you're learning marketing skills, you're learning customer service skills. One of my friends, his sister worked out in DC for the VP. She did a lot of communications and constituent work. She ended up becoming the head of customer service for a major Fortune 500 company. Those jobs can be, those opportunities are out there, and you don't have to be working, out in DC to get them. Your jobs are just as important. Just learn them well. Learn how to implement processes too. That's the other important part. If you see how things can be done better, don't be afraid to bring those to your boss and just say, or many folks will just say, this is how we always did it, or this is how the caucus always did it. If you see an opportunity to make tweaks and changes for efficiency purposes, make sure you share those. That includes with scheduling and constituent cases. And then, of course, use your position to network with fellow staff. And when you network with fellow staff, or when you have an opportunity to do something outside of the office, think about others that you can bring with you from staff. That's a powerful thing, is when you're actually coordinating and building relationships for other people. So for networking, making contacts, your boss sits on a lot of committees where there's a lot of interested people. Use those relationships and connect with those people, learn about their lives, their path. How do they get to where they are today? Touch on their current business issues that they're working on, but really make it about the human, about the person. It's the best part about this industry. When you go to events, go to events. I would implore you. I know that some bosses want to be the face and the only one in the room, but many, if you can convince them, would want you to go with them. It's additional support. You work for them. You're an extension of them. The more people, the better. You can touch more people. But if you go to an association's day at the Capitol, go over there and meet the people, not just from the district, but the government affairs team that actually put it together. Attend legislative fundraisers. I know that that is something that each boss has a different opinion about, but that can be an extremely helpful way for you to navigate and to meet people, and navigate the large swath of people in Lansing. And when you get there, go with friends. If you don't want to go it alone, go with other staff. But I implore you to meet one new person at each event and get their card, get to know one person. You'll be surprised with how quick your network will grow just by meeting one person, because that person inevitably, especially if your boss is of interest to what their interest is or is on a committee, you will inevitably get asked to lunch or to coffee just to touch base as a follow-up. And you will meet more and more people that way. if you like to golf in this town, right? These are life advice, but it's also a way to navigate and get invited to things. Let people know. There's golf outings all summer long. I know that there's a lot of other responsibilities this summer, but with those responsibilities, you can have some freedom too, hopefully. And you're doing it on behalf of your boss, not just for yourself, but your boss can be in more places if you're out there on their behalf. By the very nature of your job, you have a built-in and very significant network of people. And again, if you're looking to do something outside of politics, you're only a phone call away from people that can help navigate what that would look like. If you wanted to leave Lansing, Bob and somebody else had mentioned being a realtor. If you wanted to become a realtor, there's, the Realtors Association can help you navigate that, the top people, right? If you wanted to become a community college president or somebody that works at the college, Brandy Johnson, she's on the 5th floor or 6th floor in our building. She could help navigate that for you and put you in touch with people that you could talk with. Same thing if you wanted to be an insurance agent, it doesn't matter, or an association president or a lobbyist. People are only a phone call away. So Arnold, I could talk forever. That's one thing about being older and I guess more seasoned in this town is oftentimes the advice is plentiful, and sometimes it's better as a follow-up based on some of their individual interests, or if they individually have questions that they don't want to share, please follow up. My email is Brendan, BRENDAN @mlcmi.com. But most of you probably have the Trust Scott Rossman guide sitting on one of your desks. So you can just find us under MLC. But one thing I implore you to do as well is let this be part of a beginning of a discussion. But I implore you to follow up with some people you know and just ask questions, and we can help navigate, help you navigate like what's next and when the timing is right to take the jump to something different.
Sage advice, Brendan, sage advice. And yes, you and I both worked together in the legislature at the same time. I won't say how long I've been there, except to say I had a 10-year jump on you. So that might give our audience some idea of how long I've been in and around this. But, everything you said hit home for me. In terms, I just want to reiterate, I think from the skill set standpoint, you pointed out some great things. Folks that work in and around as staffers, they know how to resolve a problem. They might not know exactly and immediately who to make that call to, but they know how to get it done. And that is a unique skill set that, as you noted, not many people in the state of Michigan or anywhere have, but you all know how to run the bureaucracy. You've been in a system, and the world is made up of systems. Whether it's a legislature and the bureaucracy there or in the private sector, it doesn't make a difference. You will know how to negotiate a system, and your connectors. You're all becoming connectors. Very important skill sets. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks to everyone that was on this session. Brendan, I appreciate your mention of MPLP, the Michigan Political Leadership Program. With our annual dinner is in May. If folks are interested, anyone on this is interested in running for office at some point in time, MPLP is a great stepping stone, a great program, bipartisan, one of the only bipartisan programs of its kind in the country. Check it out. If you have interns, I'd urge you to nominate them for the Rosenthal Intern of the Year Award. That's a program we run with James Madison College, and that is due in on March 4th. And last but not least, our next luncheon, public policy forum, we still call them luncheon, even though we're not in person these days, is on February the 22nd, and it will be on changes in the workforce. So should be an interesting discussion. With that, I'd like to thank our legislative leadership for their support of this program, and certainly the House and Senate Business Offices for helping us pull this together and this session together, and our MSU partners at MSU Extension and the Office of Governmental Affairs. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our presenters. Again, video recording will be posted. You'll probably receive an email with links to the video recording as well as to the presentations done today. Thank you all, and everyone have a great weekend. Appreciate it.